Welcome back to A Little Faith. This is a podcast sponsored by the Williamsburg Christadelphian Foundation. A Little Faith podcast explores both the challenges and hope of living a life of faith. I'm Steve, and I'm here with Ben Pearce. Today, we're going to be talking about wellness and stress. Ben is going to share how meditation, exercise, diet, sleep recovery, and optimism have played a key part in his life to reduce stress. And we're also going to discuss how we can reframe how we look at the Bible to be a really practical guide to help us live life in a really positive and healthy way. Ben, it's great to be here with you. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi, yes. So my name's Ben Pearce. I'm based in the UK and live about 30 miles west of London. I've just had my 40th birthday and I'm married with two young kids. And I work in the IT industry, so I work with how businesses use artificial intelligence and cloud computing. And also, I'm a Christian, so I've grown up a Christian and I'm an active member of our local Christian church.
Apparently, life can be stressful for you. I think that's maybe the jumping off point for why you developed this material that you presented other people and that we're talking about today. Your own stress level, helping manage your stress, is that right?
Yeah, so I would say, I've always had a reasonably stressful job. And then being a dad with two young kids, trying to help out at church, and be an active contributor to society, I guess. Probably, is it 4 or 5 years now? Something like that. I think I wasn't really coping with that particularly well. And I remember there was, and I think there was problems at work. Things were very stressful at work. My son had a couple of health issues, and just coping with life, I think probably 4 or 5 years ago, just got a bit tough. And I remember there was three things, and I sort of remember them quite vividly. One, I remember being at a conference, and this guy was chatting about how he'd had a heart attack at Brussels airport, and he was only in his 40s. And he was saying how that had changed his life and how he almost dead. But I do remember sitting there in the audience going, God, that could be me. So I remember that bit thinking, God, there's something I need to do. Something's not quite right with me. And then I remember one of our bosses at work sending us on like a stress course. And I'm a manager of people, and it was there to learn how to detect stress in other people. And I remember, being taught by the trainer and them going through the checklist, and all these things. I was sat next to a friend of mine, and I remember as I went through the list going, tick, 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 tick. And we did the entire thing. And I was like, do you know what? I've got every symptom of what to look for in stress here. And I thought, do you know what? This is saying I need to do something here. Not only had I sat there listening to that bloke thinking, it feels like I could have a heart attack. Then I know that I've ticked every box in the stressing. And I remember it sort of heading towards Christmas time. And I remember thinking, I'll just get to the Christmas holidays. I'll get a break and everything will be fine. And I remember getting to that break. And I suddenly, in my head, I was just going to switch off instantly and suddenly have this nirvana of relaxation and got to Christmas, and I didn't. And so I was quite, still feeling quite stressed through that. And it was at that point that I thought, and thankfully I did, I sort of caught myself and said, I've got to change something now, because if I don't change something now, this is all going a bit south. And so I managed to catch myself and then start to think, right, so what am I going to do to solve this kind of, whatever it was, I wouldn't have really known what it was, this stress situation or this not coping particularly well situation. I need to do something. So I caught myself and then put some things in place to make myself better.
You're a young person, so this seems a little untimely in your life in a way to feel that much stress and pressure. Like, I would think that would build over a period of time where finally you're feeling like you're going to have a heart attack or something.
Yeah, well, maybe. I mean, I let me say I'd have been mid-30s, and I don't think I was anywhere clinically having a heart attack. I guess it was more I was feeling stressed, not coping so well. And so when some guy was saying I'd had something bad happening, I was sort of thinking something bad could happen to me. So I don't think I've ever had any actual heart problems or anything like that. But yeah, and I would say, so I was mid-30s. And I don't think it is very uncommon So if I look around people I've worked with, if I look around people that I've gone to church with, there's lots of blokes in their mid-30s that are struggling, with mental health, with stress, and I could probably name, just thinking pretty quickly, 5 to 10 people that I know reasonably well that have struggled with that.
Was this affecting your faith journey in any way?
So was this affecting my faith journey? Well, I guess so. In that perhaps I couldn't show up as the best dad, the best husband, the best church member, the best employee, the best manager. So I guess there's all these things that I'm doing in my life, and I'm not able to show up as the best version of me in any of them. So yeah, I think it was kind of eating at the root of me a little bit. So it was really affecting me in all aspects of my life, including my faith.
Developing the best aspect of yourself is apparently important to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to feel like I am contributing something positive. And it probably felt like if I'd have carried on as I would start to become a drain in whichever way that might be. And so I wanted to get back to how I've always been, which is quite positive, quite optimistic, quite engaged. And I wanted to get back to myself, really. And I felt like I wasn't being myself.
That resonated with me because in my early 67, I'm 67 now, but at the beginning of that, something happened to me. I don't know, it was stress related. I started seeing a counselor, and he told me it was anxiety and not depression. But I know my prayer to Jesus was, Lord, help me be me again, because something's wrong here. I'm just not me. I was depressed. Anyway, that's my side thing. But I can relate to you're saying, help me overcome this, figure this out, and be the best version of myself. So yeah, I relate to that. So, what did you do about it?
Well, the interesting thing here, and I will get to the end of the story, but for now, it didn't feel like my faith helped me at all. So if I think about what I did, there's things called a little mnemonic, MEDSO. Meditation, exercise, diet, sleep, and optimism. Those are kind of the things that I applied to my life. And interestingly, those were things that I had learnt on training courses at work. And I'd learnt these. I remember going on a course when I was about 20, 21, something like that, early in my career, and went on these courses and learnt these techniques. Well, when you're 20, 21, 22, whatever it is, what application did they have in my life? Pretty much zero. But then when I got to this challenge, I guess in my mid-30s, I was like, right, well, that stuff that I learnt about that I've just filed in the back of my brain, that's what I need to bring out, and that's what I need to use. And so that's what since then, that is what I have lived a lot. So that, to say it again, so that's meditation, exercise, diet, sleep and recovery, and optimism are all the things that have helped me really practically. And the interesting thing is that was not anything that I'd got from the Bible. That wasn't anything that I'd got from my faith. It wasn't what people were talking to me about at the church that I went to. But interestingly, all of those topics are covered in the Bible in a reasonable amount of depth. And there are examples of people using them, which is why I've kind of looked into this and listened to other podcasts and read things for myself, because there is so much of that wisdom. And actually, people don't often look at the Bible as a practical way of helping you live a positive life. And there is so much wisdom in there. And it's a question of unsurfacing it and looking at it. And all of these things that I'd learned, in a secular training course are there in the Bible for me to read about. And so that's when I started looking into it a little bit, because it wasn't my faith that helped me out of that, but it was stuff that's contained in my faith, but nobody was talking to me about. And so the fact that I could maybe talk to people that are Christians or are interested in the Bible and say, actually, some of these really popular topics that if you go to any bookshelf and look on a self-help, top 10 bestsellers, there will be topics on these things. And these are the things that you see people in the Psalms write about, that you see Jesus talk about all throughout the Bible. So I wanted to kind of make that link on how the Bible helps you really practically live and backs up a lot of things that people are now finding out through recent research and recent science. It is almost corroborating what's been written down for thousands of years. So let me give you an example of that from the Bible. Let me start with sleep and recovery. So as I grew up being a Christian, there was, and I think this is a fusion of my faith, the culture that I'm in, maybe some family work ethic, I don't know, probably a fusion of all of these things. But the idea was you pretty much just sort of, I guess, work hard, whether that be through whether you're working hard at work, whether that's you're helping and contributing to the church and helping bits and pieces. There wasn't really much talk that I recall about rest and recovery and relaxation and that kind of stuff. I did a really interesting topic where I wore a device, a little electronic sensor that got pinned, one on my chest and one on my side, and I wore it for 5 days, and it monitored my heart, my heart. And what it measured was this thing called heart rate variance that I'd never ever heard of before. But basically that is the difference between your heartbeats. So if you imagine you've got a heartbeat of 120, you'd have thought what would be happening is every half a second you'd be having a heartbeat. But it turns out there's a variation in how long those heartbeats are, the time apart, and that's called heart rate variance. And what they've been able to therefore study is when you are in recovery mode and when you are in exerting energy mode. So I wore one of these. And it was fascinating because it talked about how much you recover, don't recover, and it talked about sleep and sleep analysis and that kind of stuff. And the really important thing is how important recovery is to human beings, how little of it we do as human beings in whatever century it is we're living in at the moment, 21st century. And if you go right back to Genesis, chapter 1, 7th day, what's it written down there on the 7th day? Whether you think that's a literal creation or whether you think that's a poem, whatever you think, but the point is on the 7th day, God rested. And right from the very beginning of the Bible, there is this idea of recovery. And when you look into that with the science these days, and the science is helping us understand more and more about our bodies, the best way for recovery is sleep, and people need 8 hours of sleep a day. We're in this modern world now where you can use your mobile phone and electric lights until 1 o'clock in the morning, then you can get up at, 3 hours sleep, start it all again. We have a lot less rest and recovery. But this idea of recovery is there right from the beginning of the Bible. And we've almost forgotten about it. And it's been this work hard culture. And then people are starting, like me, to struggle with that, starting to go pop, whatever. And actually those things that are right there at the beginning of the Bible are so vital to us. And it's something we almost just choose to ignore.
Yeah, that's a good point. Especially thinking about just electricity in our lives and the fact that we have lights and we can push our day compared to an Abraham or a whatever. Somebody, the cycle is different and probably less stressful because, hey, I don't have any light or I got a little lantern or whatever and I'm going to rest now.
Yeah, it's dark. Yeah, you're going to get 12 hours sleep. I mean, what do you do once it's all got dark? You've not got that much light. There's only so much, I guess, you can do. And it's interesting. So things perhaps weren't such a problem, thousands of years ago as they are today. The idea that you could stay up into the middle of the night with blue light in your eyes, stopping your recovery, as being as effective. That wasn't an issue that they had to concern themselves with. But the idea of recovery and rest and recovery was baked in from the beginning. It's just how does that apply to a pre-electrified world, to a post-electrified world, to a social media world? How does that apply? And the way you apply recovery perhaps needs to be slightly different, but the principle of recovery is absolutely there.
I'm a guy who feels, I have a saying sometimes that says, every heartbeat, I gotta make use of every heartbeat. I only have so many heartbeats left. Mm-hmm. I only have so many, so I'm like overbooked. I have too much on my plate almost all the time because I feel like, time's gonna run out. But from what you're saying, and I feel that on the other side too, which I have a friend of mine, Chris, a friend who's on my case about this. I feel guilty, I haven't used time effectively and I filled every minute, somehow. But I'm kind of thinking that maybe I'm not guilty, that God is saying, or could say to me, the Lord could say, slow down, it's okay. You're not going to get as much done as you think you should, and it doesn't matter. It'd be better if you were healthier or whatever. You weren't so running all the time, that you took time to sit and reflect. Well, I think one of your words was meditation.
Yeah, well, I think I could answer that in loads of different ways, and my brain heads off in about 100 different ways as you start talking about that. I think the first thing, I'm going to go back to the principle of recovery is right there at the beginning. And if you believe that humans are created in God's image, so God's designed you to need some recovery time. So that's the first thing. The second thing I'd then say, for me, I think about it as quality, not quantity. So I could run around and do 50 things awfully, or I could do one thing really well. What's of better value? The one thing done really well, or the 50 things done really badly? I then start to think about the idea of, just for me, I couldn't continue doing that 50 things really badly. I couldn't continue and survive and thrive in that. So that just personally wouldn't work for me. And then the other thing, and I think I see this creeping in more and more, is it's the comparison of yourself to others. I think perhaps there used to be less comparison to others, and now we're in this hyper-connected world where you can always compare yourself, whether that be on social media, Facebook, Twitter, if it's more professional on LinkedIn, or if it's just on Christian stuff. You can always see somebody doing something better, showing you the edited highlight reel of their life that makes you feel really bad about yourself. So I think in lots of different ways, you could explore that in lots of different ways. But for me, and the way I operate, and I think I see this, is very beneficial to others too. The idea of recovering, doing less things, prioritizing what you say yes to and what you say no to is really important.
It's good. You're speaking right to me. Because, I need to learn to say no. It's just hard.
It is. It is, and it's something I now say no a lot more with as a family. So me and my wife have made this conscious decision to say no, and that comes with some sacrifices. So quite often we might get an invite to something that we'd love to do, and we just have to say we're going to say no. It's not because we don't want to do it, but it's because I know I need some downtime, and if I look at what's coming up the rest of the week, and I need to do that well. I need to do those things well. So I'm going to need to say no to that. And so it does just make you question, what do you prioritize with your time? What do I prioritize to my family, to be a good dad? What do I prioritize to my wife, to be a good husband? What do I prioritize to God, to try and be a good Christian? What about the practical implications of that on my church or as an employee? I'm trying to balance those things and work out what are the things I want to say yes to, and I have to say no to something. So what's that going to be? And it is a bit of a sacrifice at times, but it's a sacrifice that I would happily make, knowing how much better I am as a result of it.
I was just reminded of a story that I heard once. There was an orchestra director, like I don't remember any of these names. Anyway, so this guy was known for thinking highly of himself, whatever, but just on the go all the time. So he came out of some concert that was a great success, jumped into a car at the curb that was ready for him, and said, "Drive, drive, drive, drive." And the driver said, "Where?" He says, "Doesn't matter where, they need me everywhere." It's this kind of mentality of, I just got so busy, I gotta keep going to wherever.
So quite often, if you go through the Gospels and look, there's quite a few examples you can look at where it just says Jesus withdrew to a solitary place. So it's there right from the beginning of the Bible. You see it as an example in Jesus. You see it all over the Psalms. This idea of being still, going to a solitary place, is really, really important. And I find it is. And it's not something that I naturally do. I would say people compare me to the Duracell bunny. I just sort of keep going. And it's something that I've needed to learn. So that recovery is really important. So saying no so that there's downtime. The sleep, making sure I'm getting plenty of sleep, that makes a massive difference to me. And having young kids, that perhaps don't like to sleep, that's like some kind of weird endurance test or some kind of torture or something. But the other thing that I found that works really well is meditation. And so that's something that I've invested a bit of time and energy into learning how to do, and something that I find really helpful. And so probably for me, what works is maybe 3-4 times a week, maybe 10 minutes or so or at a time, just meditating, doing a meditation, and that really helps me. And if I can feel that I'm getting a bit stressed, or things are getting a little bit more difficult, or there's things that are more challenging going on or more emotionally difficult to deal with, I then dial that up a little bit, so maybe it's not 10 minutes, it's 20 minutes or something like that. And I find that has a tremendously positive impact as well.
So can you describe to me the methodology behind, or what you do to meditate?
So the first thing I'd say is I'm not a meditation master, and there are loads of books, podcasts, videos, people teaching about it. I've been on a couple of training courses with people, and I've watched a few podcasts on it. So what I do is in an ideal world, I get in a position called the semi-supine position, which is basically lying on your back with your knees at sort of 45 degrees. You could look that one up. So I get a semi-supine position. I set a little buzzer. I've got a little vibration on my watch. Set that for 10 minutes. And then just slow down my breathing and really focus. And the idea is that you're trying to focus on the present, as opposed to what's going on at work, this challenge you got with your kid, what the argument you had with your wife, whatever it is. It's to bring that back. And then whatever you focus on, there's loads of different things that you could focus on. That could just be purely your breathing. That could be imagining yourself in a certain situation. That could be just feeling what different parts of your body feel like and bringing your attention, doing a body scan. It could be a prayer. It could be reciting something over. There's loads and loads of different techniques. But the idea of the common thing between all of them is that you're trying to bring your focus onto something, that you're just there and you're focusing on that for that period of time, and you're just there in that meditation.
Any examples of that in the Bible?
Loads. So if you were just to open up the Psalms, you would see psalm after psalm, meditate on, you could literally type it in Bible Gateway, go into the Psalms, type in meditation, and you'll just see, they'll just come up for the Psalms. I think the earliest one I found is right back in Genesis. You've got Isaac, I think it's when he meets Rebecca, his future wife. He's up on the mountains meditating. So right back in Genesis, all the way through the Psalms, and then I'd say, and I'll go back to Jesus again, saying, he would take himself away to a solitary place. He would be in prayer, which is a form of meditation in its own right, focusing on something very specific. So I think there's lots of examples of it throughout the Bible.
Yeah, some of my favorite things about Jesus are those passages, because it just shows him as a human.
Yeah. So lots of it, meditation, either the word meditation or be still. That's the other thing that comes up a lot, just this idea of being still. Again, lots of verses that come up about just being still, which is not something that comes naturally to me or something that I would ever really have done had I not felt that I'd got to a point where I needed to change the way I was, some of the behaviours that I had, I guess.
You came to a realization because of hearing about the guy who had a heart attack. But how does a person take this to heart? Or make that shift in their life? What do they have to, I guess, just a thing you just have to decide that's important for you. But
yeah, I think it is a bit of an effort. And so unless it's something that you want to do, you're never going to do it because somebody else tells you to do it. It's going to be something that you'll do because you need to. And so the question is, what is that trigger? I think at the moment, a lot of people talk about mental health, and rightly so. They talk about the stigma it's had historically and how that shouldn't be there. And as I said, I can think of lots of people I know in the 30s that have struggled with this kind of stuff. I think you see a lot of people suffering from anxiety, depression, and I think some of these techniques really help with that as well. I think there is, I would say, the way I think about it is that there is, mental health where you need a medical expert to help you. There is also mental health from hey, I do these things as part of my well-being that benefit me. And they are maybe slightly separate things, but one benefits the other. But there are definitely people that need to see a doctor and get some help. There should never, ever be any shame in any of that. It's a medical condition. But there are also these things that these behaviours can do to help alleviate some of those symptoms, but also help you with general mental well-being. So I guess it's whatever that trigger is for different people, whether is it stress, anxiety, depression, feeling something isn't quite right, not being able to sleep properly. There's loads and loads of triggers for people, but there's got to be something that triggers people.
So basically, you're saying if somebody's listening to this who feels stressed, as you had described you did, that you're encouraging them to, that means something. Take stock. That is, change your life to change your habits or your way of living.
Yeah. If you just carry on doing the same thing, you can't expect different outcomes. So if you carry on like that, and the other thing is, if you're on the edge and you're just about coping now, what if something comes and throws a spanner in the works, and you've not got that resilience, so that then any issue that comes along, whatever it might be, if you haven't got that resilience, you're going to struggle. What I've found by doing these sorts of things is actually what I've then been able to cope with has been a lot more intense. So this is an interesting thing. If I think back to, let's say, 4 or 5 years ago when I was struggling a little bit, I had a job that was just insane a couple of years ago, and I managed to cope with it and enjoy it and thrive in it a little bit. And I had to put all of these things, so meditation, exercise, diet, sleep, this optimism, I had to do that. I felt like an Olympian. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm a diet. I need to make sure I got my sleep. I need to make sure I get this amount of exercise in. And by able to do that, my resilience was that much higher that actually what I could have achieved was a lot better than I could have done before I did all that 4 or 5 years ago. So I think it's not only about just coping, but actually it's how do you thrive, and these sorts of things help you get much better and better and better. And then going back to your bit about feeling guilty if you're not doing enough, if you're now cooking on gas, for want of a better phrase, how much better you can be.
So where's optimism in the Bible?
Optimism in the Bible. Well, there's loads, actually. There is, so I'm just trying to think of a couple that just spring straight to my mind. I mean, the first one is about worrying. There's a lot of people that maybe suffer from anxiety about what might be happening in the future and what may or may not happen, and how much energy they put into thinking about things that never happen. So there's verses in the New Testament, saying, don't worry, there's just no need to worry. Who can achieve anything by worrying? Nobody can achieve anything by worrying. So I think that would be firstly, a great thought about optimism. The second one is then, whether you think the Lord has a plan for you at all in any way, or is looking after you in any way. So whether you think that there is a God or a divine being that is looking after you and loves you and cares for you in any way. And if you do, that's a tremendously optimistic thing. So I would say there's a whole lot there talking about how we as individuals are loved. And that brings a lot of hope and a lot of optimism. So I think there's this idea of not worrying. There's this idea that everything isn't all random and that there is a God that loves you. So things like that, I think, really help, bring out the optimism. And then I guess it's what you think might happen in the future. So whether you maybe think that Jesus might return back to earth, or this idea of a kingdom on earth. And if you're thinking around that, again, that's an optimism that this world isn't going to implode and just destroy itself, that there is some hope for the future as well. And I think that's very difficult at the moment when we're talking about climate change, when you see some of the politics that are going on at the moment, some of the conflicts that are going on. It's easy to get sucked out of that optimism. So trying to get that balance, I think the Bible really helps with that optimism.
So is there would you put this in any way into a call for action for believers? That the Bible is saying, is not just offering some good advice, but maybe is actually saying, no, really, you need to do these sorts of things if you're going to be my disciple.
I guess the realization, or the call to action for me is, I think we have thought of the Bible as a very interesting academic book with some great theological arguments that we can argue about. And we have not looked at it as much as a practical set of things that will help you live your life now in a really positive and healthy way where you can thrive. So that might be my call to action. So there's a really well-known verse that I look at quite differently now. So it's love your Lord God with all your heart and all yourself, and love your neighbour as yourself. So lots of people might have heard that. There's 3 entities that are loved there. There's love God, there's love your neighbour, and actually there's love yourself. And we've always thought, or I've always thought of that love yourself as like, because men are just, and women are just, really selfish, and we just care about ourselves. But actually, the question I'd ask a lot of people today is, do you love yourself? And if I think of love as being a verb, as a doing word, so do we love ourselves? What does that mean? That means taking care of ourselves. So that means taking care of ourselves in perhaps the relationship we have with God, the relationship we have with each other, our mental well-being, our physical well-being, our spiritual well-being. Do we invest any time and energy in that love yourself part? And it's such a often quoted verse. And I look at that these days in a different light. So I guess the call to action would be to think about, are you really loving yourself and thinking about your own spiritual well-being, physical well-being, mental well-being? Are you thinking about that and some of the great tips that are there in the Bible from us? And if you are and applying that, I think that is a far better foundation and springboard for the loving your neighbour and helping other people. Because if you're in a great place yourself, you're in a much better place to be effective helping others as well. So I think that would be my call to action.
No, super. That's super. Thank you very much for sharing it with us. Certainly things to think about. I need to do that. I need to just say no more. But they need me everywhere.
I am that important that without me, they're doomed.
So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate it.
It's been fun.